The rain hammered my windshield like bullets as I sat in my beat-up Honda, waiting for my takeout order from Chen's Palace. Just another Thursday night in this godforsaken city, where the neon signs reflected off wet asphalt like broken promises. I'm Patrick Sullivan, 40 years old, software developer by day, amateur boxer by night, and apparently the world's biggest fool. That's when I saw them. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My wife Dana stepped out of the Marriott downtown, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the hotel's golden light. She wasn't alone. Eddie Carmichael, some hot-shot business consultant with a face that screamed, "Trust fund baby," had his hands all over her. They were kissing like teenagers, completely oblivious to the world around them. But here's the kicker. Dana's best friend Janice was lurking nearby, actually taking pictures of them with her phone. What kind of sick game were they playing? Well, I'll be damned, I muttered, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. If adultery were an Olympic sport, my wife would be going for the gold medal. 22 years of marriage, and this is what I get. Dana, the ice-cold CEO of her tech startup, always claimed she was working late. Turns out, she was working something else entirely. My phone buzzed, a bank alert. Dana had just transferred $50,000 to something called Carmichael Consulting LLC. My stomach dropped like a stone. I followed them at a distance, watching as they climbed into Eddie's flashy red Porsche. They drove to some upscale restaurant where I couldn't afford the appetizers. Through the window, I watched them feed each other dessert, while Janice sat at a corner table still snapping photos. The next morning, I confronted Dana in our kitchen. She was sipping her usual green smoothie, dressed in one of those power suits that cost more than my monthly salary. "Having fun at the Marriott last night?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Dana didn't even flinch. She just looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said, "I don't know what you're talking about, Patrick. You're being paranoid again." "Paranoid? I saw you with Eddie Carmichael. I saw Janice taking pictures." "You're delusional," she said, setting down her glass with deliberate calm. "Maybe you should see someone about these fantasies." "Fantasies? Dana, I have bank records. You transferred 50 grand to his company yesterday." That's when her mask slipped, just for a second. A flicker of panic crossed her face before the Ice Queen returned. "That's a legitimate business investment," she said. "Eddie's consulting firm is helping with our Series B funding round. Not that you'd understand complex financial structures." The condescension in her voice hit me like a slap. This was the woman I'd supported through business school, the woman I'd believed in when everyone else called her ideas crazy. "I understand enough to know when I'm being lied to," I said. Dana stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Patrick, you're embarrassing yourself. If you keep making these ridiculous accusations, I'll have no choice but to discuss this situation with my attorney." She grabbed her designer purse and headed for the door. "Oh, and don't forget, we're having dinner with my mother tonight. Try not to make a fool of yourself." After she left, I searched the house like a man possessed. In Dana's home office, hidden behind a stack of business magazines, I found a burner phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages. "Can't wait to feel your hands on me again." E. "Patrick's working late tonight. Come over. D. The prenup will protect everything. He'll get nothing when this is over. D." But the message that made me freeze was from Janice. "Photos uploaded to secure server. Phase 2 ready to implement. He won't know what hit him." Phase 2? What the hell was Phase 2? That evening, Dana's mother, Margaret, hosted one of her pretentious dinner parties at her mansion in the hills. The old witch had never liked me, always thought Dana had married beneath her station. Tonight, she was in rare form. "Patrick, dear," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Dana tells me you've been having some episodes lately. Paranoid delusions, she said. Perhaps you should consider therapy. I wanted to tell the old bat exactly what I thought of her and her precious daughter, but Dana was watching me with those predatory eyes, waiting for me to lose control. I'm fine, Margaret, I said through gritted teeth. Just working through some trust issues. Dana's laugh was like glass breaking. Trust issues? Patrick, you've always been insecure. Remember when you accused me of having an affair with my yoga instructor, or my personal trainer, or that barista at Starbucks? She was rewriting history, making me sound like a jealous lunatic. The worst part was, I could see the other guests nodding along, buying every word. This is different, I said quietly. Is it? Dana leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the same pathetic behavior from the same pathetic man. The next few weeks were hell on earth. Dana and Eddie started appearing together at public events, always with some business excuse. Strategic partnerships, Dana called it, expanding our market reach. Meanwhile, Janice was busy spreading poison through our social circle. At the grocery store, at the gym, at every neighborhood gathering, she'd corner people with her concerned whispers. I'm worried about Patrick, she'd say, shaking her head sadly. Dana's confided in me about his paranoid episodes. He's been making wild accusations, following her around. She's scared. One by one, our friends began treating me like a pariah. Tom and Jennifer Martinez, who'd been to our house dozens of times, suddenly stopped returning my calls. Mike and Lisa Chen crossed the street when they saw me coming. Even my neighbor Bob, who'd borrowed my tools countless times, wouldn't make eye contact. The only person who still treated me like a human being was Mason Rodriguez, my old friend who ran a boxing gym under the highway overpass. Mason was ex-cop, built like a brick wall, with hands that had seen their share of trouble. You look like hell, Patrick, he said, as I worked the heavy bag one evening. What's eating you? I told him everything, the affair, the money, the photos, the systematic destruction of my reputation. Mason listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or grunting. So what are you going to do about it? He asked when I finished. What can I do? She's got money, lawyers, connections. I'm just some software developer who peaked in high school. Mason grabbed the bag, steadying it. You know what your problem is, Patrick? You're still thinking like a victim. Stop letting them write your story. Easy for you to say. You're not the one being gaslit by your wife and her cronies. No, but I've seen plenty of bullies in my time. They all have one thing in common. They're cowards. Push back hard enough and they crumble. That weekend, Dana announced she was hosting a company party at some trendy downtown venue. A celebration of their successful Series B funding round, she said. Of course, Eddie would be there as the guest of honor. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. The place was packed with tech bros and venture capitalists, all congratulating each other on their brilliance. Dana was holding court near the bar, radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my car. Eddie spotted me first. He sauntered over with that smug smile plastered on his face, carrying 2 drinks. Patrick, what a surprise. I didn't know you were invited to this little celebration. I wasn't, I said. But since my wife's company is apparently in business with yours, I thought I should meet my partner. Eddie's smile faltered slightly. Partner? I think there's been some confusion. I'm simply providing consulting services. $50,000 worth of consulting services. That's a lot of advice. Business is complicated, Eddie said, his voice taking on a condescending tone. I wouldn't expect someone in your position to understand the intricacies of high-level strategic consulting. That's when he accidentally bumped into me, spilling his drink all over my shirt. The red wine soaked through the fabric, staining my only decent dress shirt. Oh, how clumsy of me, Eddie said, not bothering to hide his smirk. I'm so sorry, Patrick. Though I have to say, red is definitely your color. It matches your face. The entire party was watching now. I could see people pulling out their phones, ready to capture whatever happened next. Dana was staring at me with those cold eyes, daring me to make a scene. Something inside me snapped. My right hook caught Eddie square on the jaw, dropping him like a sack of potatoes. The satisfying crack of knuckle-meeting bone echoed through the suddenly silent room. "You son of a bitch," I growled, standing over his groaning form. "How's that for complicated?" Security was on me in seconds, dragging me toward the exit while Eddie rolled around on the floor, clutching his face. As they hauled me away, I caught Dana's expression, not shock or concern, but pure, calculating satisfaction. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Within hours, the video was everywhere. "Jealous husband attacks wife's business partner," read the headlines. "Domestic violence concerns mount for local CEO." Dana played her part perfectly, giving tearful interviews about living in fear, about my escalating paranoid behavior, about how she was consulting with attorneys about her safety. The next morning, I found divorce papers taped to my front door. Dana was citing irreconcilable differences, domestic violence, and mental instability. Thanks to the prenup I'd stupidly signed 22 years ago, she'd get everything. The house, the business, even my retirement accounts. The cover letter was written in Dana's precise handwriting. "You'll get nothing, Patrick. Just like you deserve." But as I sat in my kitchen staring at those papers, something Mason had said echoed in my mind. Stop letting them write your story. Maybe it was time to start writing my own. I spent the next week in my basement, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printouts, using every skill I'd learned in 20 years of software development. If Dana thought she could outsmart me with legal documents and financial manipulation, she was about to learn that her paranoid husband had a few tricks of his own. The first breakthrough came when I hacked into the email server of Dana's company. Don't ask me how. Let's just say that being married to the CEO for 2 decades gave me certain insights into password habits. What I found made me freeze. Dana had been planning this for months. Email chains between her, Eddie, and Janice revealed a conspiracy that went far deeper than a simple affair. They weren't just stealing my wife and my dignity, they were stealing my future. The Series B funding round Dana kept mentioning, the one Eddie was supposedly consulting on, it was real, and it was massive, $15 million from a consortium of investors. But here's the kicker. Someone had forged my signature on the incorporation documents, making me a legal co-founder and 50% owner of Dana's company. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized the diabolical brilliance of it. Dana needed my signature to make the company look more established, more credible to investors. She'd planned to divorce me and buy out my shares for pennies on the dollar, using the prenup to justify the lowball offer. But she'd made one crucial error. She'd never actually offered to buy me out. As far as the law was concerned, I was still a 50% owner of a company now worth $15 million. I printed everything and drove straight to Mason's gym. He was training some kid on the speed bag when I burst through the door, waving the documents like a man possessed. "Mason, you're not going to believe this," I said, spreading the papers across his desk. "Dana forged my signature on business documents. I legally own half her company." Mason studied the papers with the careful attention of an ex-cop. "This is solid evidence, Patrick. You could take this to the police." "No," I said. "I want something better than criminal charges. I want justice." "What did you have in mind?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I want to give them exactly what they gave me. Public humiliation and financial ruin." My sister Katie was the next person I called. She worked as a paralegal downtown and had connections throughout the legal community. More importantly, she'd never liked Dana and had been waiting 22 years for permission to show it. "I always knew that Ice Queen was trouble," Katie said when I explained the situation. "What do you need?" "Information. Dana's company is about to go public with this funding announcement. I need to know when and where." "Consider it done. And Patrick, it's about time you grew a spine." The press conference was scheduled for the following Thursday at the downtown Marriott, the same hotel where I'd first spotted Dana and Eddie together. The irony was delicious. I spent the intervening days gathering more evidence and planning my counterattack. Dana's forged signature was just the beginning. Digging deeper into the company's financial records, I found evidence of self-dealing, inflated expense accounts, and questionable transactions that would make any investor nervous. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. My neighbor Bob, the same guy who'd been avoiding me for weeks, knocked on my door Tuesday evening. "Patrick, I owe you an apology," he said, looking genuinely ashamed. "Janice Morrison came by a few weeks ago, told me some things about you that I now realize were lies." "What kind of things?" "She said you'd been threatening Dana, following her around, making her life hell. She showed me photos on her phone, pictures of you outside Dana's office building, outside restaurants where she was having business dinners." I felt the pieces clicking together. "Bob, those weren't random photos. She was documenting Dana's affair and making it look like I was stalking her." "That's what I figured out. See, I've been having my own problems with Janice. She's been pressuring my wife to invest in some scheme of hers, something about angel investing in tech startups. When Linda started asking questions about the paperwork, Janice got nasty, threatening even." "Do you still have those photos?" Bob pulled out his phone. "I took pictures of the pictures, if you know what I mean. Thought they might come in handy someday." Looking at the images, I could see how Janice had manipulated the narrative. Photos of me leaving the grocery store became stalking Dana at lunch. Pictures of me at the gas station became following her to business meetings. It was character assassination at its finest. "Bob, you might have just saved my life," I said. "There's more," he said. "Janice let slip something about Dana's mother being involved too. Something about Margaret putting up money for Eddie's consulting firm, with the understanding that she'd get it back plus interest once the divorce was finalized. Now I had the full picture. This wasn't just adultery. It was a criminal conspiracy involving fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. Dana, Eddie, Janice, and Margaret had all played their parts in a scheme to destroy me and steal millions of dollars. But they'd underestimated their victim. Wednesday night, I sat in my basement, surrounded by evidence and planning my revenge. Mason's words echoed in my head. Push back hard enough, and they crumble. Tomorrow, at Dana's moment of triumph, I was going to push back harder than they'd ever imagined. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. I'd be there, armed with documents, recordings, and 22 years of pent-up rage. Dana wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that in any game, there's always a chance the underdog might win. Thursday morning dawned gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I dressed carefully, my best suit, the one I'd worn to our wedding all those years ago. If this was going to be the end of my marriage, I wanted to look the part. The Marriott's conference room was packed with reporters, investors, and tech industry bigwigs. Dana stood at the podium like a queen holding court, radiant in a red power dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Eddie sat in the front row, his jaw still slightly swollen from our encounter, wearing a smug expression that made my fists itch. Janice was working the room like a political operative, whispering to reporters and pointing in Dana's direction. Margaret sat in the back, dripping with jewelry and satisfaction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dana began, her voice carrying that familiar note of condescension, "today marks a pivotal moment for data flow solutions. Thanks to the strategic consulting provided by Carmichael Consulting and the confidence of our investor partners, we're announcing a successful Series B funding round of $15 million. The room erupted in polite applause. Dana basked in the attention, every inch the successful CEO. This funding will allow us to expand into new markets, develop cutting-edge solutions, and establish Dataflow as the premier data analytics company on the East Coast. I waited until the applause died down, then stood up in the back of the room. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "I have a question." Dana's face went white when she saw me. Eddie half rose from his chair, then thought better of it. Janice was frantically typing on her phone. "Mr. Sullivan," Dana said, trying to maintain her composure, "this is a private press conference for invited guests only." "Actually, Mrs. Sullivan," I said, emphasizing her married name, "as a 50% owner of Data Flow Solutions, I think I have every right to be here." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick hotel carpet. "I'm sorry, what?" said a reporter from the Business Journal, suddenly very interested. I walked down the center aisle, pulling documents from my briefcase. "That's right. According to these incorporation documents, filed with the state and signed by both Dana Sullivan and myself, I'm a co-founder and equal partner in Data Flow Solutions." Dana's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Hoffman, leaned over and whispered something urgent in Dana's ear. Dana's face went from white to green. "There seems to be some confusion," Dana said, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Sullivan is my estranged husband, and he's been experiencing some mental health issues lately." "Mental health issues?" I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Let me clear up the confusion for everyone." I handed copies of the documents to the nearest reporters. "These are the original incorporation papers for Data Flow Solutions, filed 18 months ago. You'll notice my signature on page 3 making me a legal co-founder. What's interesting is that I never signed these documents." The murmur in the room grew louder. Cameras started flashing. "What you're looking at," I continued, "is forgery. Someone took my signature from another document, probably our mortgage paperwork, and transferred it to these incorporation documents without my knowledge or consent." Eddie was on his feet now, his face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. You're disrupting a legitimate business function with paranoid delusions." "Paranoid delusions?" I turned to face him directly. "Is that what you call $50,000 in consulting fees for services never rendered? Is that what you call having an affair with my wife while planning to defraud me out of millions of dollars?" "Now see here." Margaret stood up in the back, her voice shrill with indignation. "I won't have you attacking my daughter with these baseless accusations." "Baseless?" I pulled out my phone and connected it to the room's audio system. "Let me play something for you, Margaret. This is a recording from Dana's burner phone, which I found hidden in our house." Dana's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "The prenup will protect everything. He'll get nothing when this is over." Then Eddie's voice. "What about the incorporation documents? If he finds out he's legally a co-owner..." Dana again. "He won't find out. Patrick's too stupid to read legal documents. By the time the divorce is final, we'll have bought out his shares for nothing." The room exploded. Reporters were shouting questions, cameras were flashing like strobe lights, and investors were heading for the exits. Dana stood frozen at the podium, her carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. But I wasn't done. "There's more," I announced, and the room quieted again. "Janice Morrison, Dana's best friend and co-conspirator, has been systematically destroying my reputation in our community, spreading lies about domestic violence and mental illness to isolate me from friends and family." I pulled out Bob's phone photos, projecting them onto the room's screen. These photos were taken by Ms. Morrison and used to create a false narrative of stalking and harassment. What they actually show is me going about my daily life while my wife conducted her affair. Janice was backing toward the exit, but I wasn't letting her escape that easily. Ms. Morrison also runs an illegal investment scheme, targeting the wives of men she's helping to destroy. She's currently under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for running an unregistered investment advisory service. That last part wasn't true yet, but it would be by the end of the day. Dana finally found her voice. "Patrick, please," she said, and for the first time in months, she sounded genuinely afraid. "Can we discuss this privately? There's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? I walked up to the podium, forcing her to step back. Dana, you've been planning to destroy me for over a year. You've stolen my money, ruined my reputation, and tried to steal my future. The only misunderstanding here is that you thought I was too stupid to fight back. I turned to address the room full of reporters and investors. Ladies and gentlemen, as the co-owner of Dataflow Solutions, I'm announcing that the Series B funding round is suspended pending a full forensic audit of the company's finances. Any investments made based on today's announcement are potentially fraudulent and should be reported to the appropriate authorities. The chaos that followed was beautiful. Dana collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Eddie was screaming at his lawyer on his phone. Margaret was demanding that someone call the police. Janice had disappeared entirely, but the best part was watching the investors flee like rats from a sinking ship. $15 million in funding, gone in 15 minutes. As I walked out of the conference room, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was in control of my own story. Dana caught up with me in the hotel lobby, grabbing my arm with desperate strength. "Patrick, wait," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We can work this out. We can split everything 50-50, just like the documents say. You can have half the company, half the house, everything." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved for over 2 decades, this stranger who'd tried to destroy me. "Dana," I said quietly, "you should have thought of that before you decided I was too stupid to matter." I walked away and didn't look back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of lawyers, accountants, and investigators. The story had legs, as they say in the news business, and every day brought fresh revelations about the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed my life. The forensic audit I'd demanded revealed even more fraud than I'd suspected. Eddie's consulting firm was a shell company with no employees, no office, and no legitimate business activities. The $50,000 Dana had transferred was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past year, she'd funneled nearly $200,000 to various accounts controlled by Eddie and Janice. Margaret's involvement ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The old witch had been funding the entire operation, using money from her late husband's estate to bankroll her daughter's scheme. She'd even put up the money for Eddie's Porsche and his fancy downtown apartment. But the most satisfying revelation came from the SEC investigation into Janice's investment scheme. It turned out she'd been running a classic Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay returns to earlier ones. When the scheme collapsed in the wake of the press conference, she'd lost over $3 million of other people's money. The criminal charges came down like dominoes. Dana was indicted for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Eddie faced charges for mail fraud and money laundering. Janice was looking at federal securities violations that could put her away for 20 years. Even Margaret was charged as an accessory after the fact. But the real victory came in civil court. Judge Patricia Chen, no relation to my former friends Mike and Lisa, was a tough, no-nonsense jurist who'd seen every kind of marital dispute imaginable. She listened to 3 days of testimony with the patience of a saint and the attention to detail of an accountant. Dana's lawyer, the same Patricia Hoffman who'd whispered urgent warnings during the press conference, did her best to salvage something from the wreckage. "Your Honor," she argued, "while my client made some poor personal choices, the prenuptial agreement clearly states that business assets acquired during the marriage remain separate property." Judge Chen looked up from her notes with the expression of someone who'd just been offered a counterfeit $20 bill. "Counselor," she said dryly, "are you seriously arguing that a prenuptial agreement should protect assets obtained through fraud and forgery?" "The business itself is legitimate, Your Honor. Dataflow Solutions has real value, real customers, real revenue." "Built with fraudulent documents and funded through criminal conspiracy," I interjected, earning a sharp look from my own lawyer. Judge Chen smiled slightly. "Mr. Sullivan, please let your attorney speak for you." My lawyer, a bulldog named Frank Morrison, no relation to Janice, thankfully, stood up with a stack of documents that looked like a phone book. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Mrs. Sullivan forged Mr. Sullivan's signature on incorporation documents, making him a legal co-owner of the business. She then conspired with multiple parties to defraud him of his rightful share, while simultaneously destroying his personal and professional reputation. Furthermore, Frank continued, Mrs. Sullivan used marital assets to fund her conspiracy, transferring over $200,000 to co-conspirators without Mr. Sullivan's knowledge or consent. The prenuptial agreement becomes null and void when one party uses it as a shield for criminal activity. Judge Chen nodded slowly. I've reviewed the evidence, and I have to say, this is one of the most elaborate marital fraud schemes I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. She turned to look directly at Dana, who sat pale and trembling at the defendant's table. Mrs. Sullivan, you forged your husband's signature on legal documents, stole marital assets to fund a criminal conspiracy, conducted an extramarital affair as part of that conspiracy, and attempted to use the legal system to legitimize your theft. In my courtroom, that's not a marital dispute. That's organized crime. The gavel came down with the finality of thunder. I hereby rule that the prenuptial agreement is null and void due to fraud. Mr. Sullivan is entitled to 50% of all marital assets, including his rightful share of data flow solutions. Mrs. Sullivan is ordered to pay restitution for all fraudulently transferred funds, plus interest and penalties. But Judge Chen wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm awarding Mr. Sullivan punitive damages in the amount of $500,000 to be paid from Mrs. Sullivan's separate assets. And given the extensive damage to Mr. Sullivan's reputation and emotional well-being, I'm also awarding him exclusive use of the marital home for a period of 2 years. Dana's sob echoed through the courtroom like the last breath of a collapsing argument. The final humiliation came 3 months later, when Dataflow Solutions was sold to a competitor for $12 million. After paying off debts and legal fees, my share came to just over $4 million. I stood outside the courthouse on a crisp October morning, watching as Dana, Eddie, and Janice were led away in handcuffs for their sentencing hearing. Dana got 5 years for fraud and conspiracy. Eddie got 7 years for his role in the scheme. Janice, as the mastermind of the investment fraud, got 15 years in federal prison. Margaret, despite her advanced age, got 2 years in minimum security for her role in funding the conspiracy. The judge noted that being 83 years old didn't excuse criminal behavior. My former friends Tom and Jennifer Martinez approached me on the courthouse steps, looking embarrassed and contrite. Patrick, Tom said, we owe you a huge apology. We should have known better than to believe those lies about you. We were terrible friends, Jennifer added. Is there any way you can forgive us? I looked at them for a long moment. These people who'd abandoned me when I needed them most, who'd believed the worst about me without asking for my side of the story. Tom, Jennifer, I said finally, I appreciate the apology. But friendship isn't something you can turn on and off like a light switch. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't worth the benefit of the doubt. I walked away, leaving them standing on the courthouse steps. Mason was waiting for me at his gym, as I knew he would be. He'd been there through the whole ordeal, never judging, never doubting, never wavering in his support. So what now? He asked, as I changed into my workout clothes. Now I start over, I said, wrapping my hands for the heavy bag. New house, new city, new life. Any regrets? I thought about that as I threw my first punch, feeling the satisfying impact travel up my arm. Just one, I said. I regret not fighting back sooner. 6 months later, I was living in a small coastal town in Maine, running my own software consulting business and training at a local boxing gym. The money from the divorce settlement had bought me a nice house with an ocean view and the freedom to work on projects that actually interested me. I never remarried. Trust, once broken so completely, is hard to rebuild. But I found peace in the simple rhythms of small-town life, in honest work and genuine friendships with people who valued loyalty over social status. Sometimes, late at night, I'd get emails from reporters asking for interviews about the data flow scandal, as it came to be known. I never responded. The story had been told, justice had been served, and I had no interest in reliving the worst period of my life for public entertainment. But every year, on the anniversary of that press conference, I'd raise a glass of good whiskey and toast the moment I stopped being a victim and started being the author of my own story. Dana, Eddie, and Janice had wanted to destroy me. Instead, they'd freed me from a life I'd never realized was a prison. They'd given me something more valuable than money or revenge. They'd given me back my self-respect. And in the end, that was worth more than all the schemes and conspiracies in the world.